good, cool boyfriend and friend to juggle all those things. But again, I'm getting off the beaten path here. I think to get us back on track, what you said earlier is what we need to do now is hit the books.
Well, we gotta hit the books, but it's also important to keep balance. You're absolutely right. I mean, I get that comment from my fiance all the time that, all I do is I wake up in the morning, I spend 18 hours a day figuring out like what this map is, because the map they gave us is not accurate of the terrain. So we had to create a new map, and I think it would be irresponsible for us to start leading people without a map and not having gotten to the place they want to get to. I feel very comfortable having given, what we've traversed as far as information and connecting these dots, that it will be a long time before, people are able to go outside of this mapped area, because it spans basically all civilized history. And if you go back to the origin of writing and language, and in fact, back when they invented something called money and currency and how it was used to, subvert populations. If you couldn't get the military might, you would use currency. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's stay on point here.
Well, I think it's a sense of urgency that I think probably drives us on, because it feels like, in a way, things are rapidly accelerating. I'm not one who says the world is going to end tomorrow or even on 2012 or anything like that. But definitely things seem to be heading for the worst. And right now we have the ability to plug a cheap microphone into a little mixer and plug that into a laptop, and we can speak over the internet, and hopefully many, many, many people can hear this and we can get it out. However, just like the videos that we share and that we save and that we get from YouTube and these archives and these podcasts and all of this work could disappear if the internet shuts off tomorrow.
Yeah, if we lose electricity, it's really hard to share podcasts and stuff.
Which would bring us back to having books.
Books. I like books. All right, so people, I think, when you get into these blind spots and what do they believe and how do they have these beliefs set up? Well, I'm sure you know how your beliefs are set up, and I know how mine were set up, but we all kind of only have an idea of how we were all conditioned, and then you realize we're all kind of conditioned very similarly. And is it for our own good? Is it for our own survival? Do they teach us about money and how all the things that we need to know? No, they teach us what we need to know to go work at their corporations, and they get us to pay $100,000 so we can pre-qualify ourselves and they can save some money, right? Knowing that we're already bought in, we're indebted, we're indentured slaves, and we're going to be, debt slaves for the rest of our lives, because once you get a mortgage, which in French, by the way, is death pledge, which in, Quebec, they call it a hypothèque instead of a mortgage, because no one would sign a death pledge if you speak French, right?
And it's within this language that we can start to see really what's going on. But please continue.
So I went through their training system. I'm like, this is awesome. I went out and got a job, and like, this is awesome. I earned my first $1 million by the time I was 30. I was like, this is awesome. And then I discovered, oh wow, there's a whole lot of information they keep from the rest of us to keep us under control. And I guess the first book that I read that really made the impression on me that I had no clue what was going on if I just relied on what they showed me, was this book called Tragedy and Hope by a professor who had taught at Princeton and Harvard and Georgetown, and he was the professor who taught Rhodes Scholar Bill Clinton and was his mentor. So when I got this book, it's huge. It's like, I don't know, it's like 2 or 3 inches thick, 2,000 pages basically. I'm sorry, 1,300 pages.
It's a massive, daunting, and sometimes actually really hard or expensive to find tome.
Well, exactly. In 2004, this book was it was out of print, and anything on any of the book exchanges were like $1,300 and above, $1,400. And I was like, why is this book so expensive? And it's obvious they don't want people to be reading this all over the place, right?
That's now, cost prohibitive, I believe, is how you would call that.
Now, today you can get the book for like $40. I've got a link to an electronic version so people can follow along with this. But basically, I was only 51 pages in, and it had blown my entire mind, because it says, the greatest of these dynasties, of course, were the descendants of Meyer Amschel Rothschild of Frankfurt, right? And it goes on and talks about his 5 sons. I was like, wait a minute, this is crazy conspiracy stuff. I've only seen this like on the web. This was pre-YouTube, so I've only seen people rant and rave on these poorly formatted websites. And I'm like, that's never been anything credible. And then all of a sudden, here's the guy who taught Bill Clinton, and he's talking about, well, yes, it's happened. It's very good history. And I was like, wow, how did they never teach us this in school? Well, Then I got a couple. I got to page like 1059, and it's talking about these different oil cartels and how they're taking over, all over the world. And it's talking about Dulles and these guys at the CIA crushing Mossadegh in Iran. Operation, what was that operation called?
Ajax.
Ajax? Yeah. And it says in here on page 1059, Colonel Norman H. Norman Schwarzkopf, former head of the Jersey State Police, who was in charge of training the Imperial Iranian Gendarmerie, right? So Schwarzkopf from the Iraq Gulf War in '91.
He's a rock star.
Yeah, totally, man. So he comes from a famous family, was involved in all this stuff. So I was like, well, that's interesting. But, what does it really say about what's going on? He goes into the CFR, and he's like, I have no aversion to all this stuff. In fact, he studied their records for 20 years writing this book, right? So he was on the inside. I thought Council on Foreign Relations was something that conspiracy theorists cooked up, right? And so here's this whole book on the history of Cecil Rhodes and his will, and in his will, which, by the way, when you try to get that 1902 book, it's not any place. It's basically not a law library. So I have an electronic copy of that, and your audience can go through, and you can see clearly that he wanted to create a secret society based on the tenets of the Jesuits only to progress the British Empire. And then he expresses his woe that the American colonies slipped away, and that it would be much easier to create a one world order if America was still part of Britain. And so they went about creating the Federal Reserve and the Council on Foreign Relations and these entities, Tavistock and whatnot, to control not only, our population's minds through media, but the global population through media. And so you have these bankers. And I was like, wow, I had this whole education I'm still paying for. I made all this money. I thought I knew, and I never had a clue, And then I thought about all the clients that I had and the different software applications they like to build.
Now,
and I had second thoughts, yeah.
We'll make the quick mention that Carroll Quigley, the author of Tragedy and Hope, was someone important enough to Bill Clinton that he mentioned him. Was it in his inaugural speech?
Yeah, it was when he got inaugurated.
So Bill Clinton, the sort of, the guy that no one had really ever heard of, who came up, with a well-styled campaign and playing saxophone on the Arsenio Hall show and things. This cool new guy comes in, but in his inaugural speech, he knows to make a verbal reference to Carroll Quigley in Tragedy and Hope. I believe the other side note that we do want to make is going into Carroll Quigley, my man James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, I think, goes well into Carroll Quigley in episode 58 of Corbett Report.
He does. He does, absolutely, because as soon as he published that, I was like, oh, somebody else is putting information out there about it, and that's less that I have to do. It's less responsibility I have, is because my perspective is, as long as some people out there are aware of these things, and it could bring a great deal of clarity. I just hadn't seen anyone except yourself, James Corbett, and a few other people talk about any of this, and then that's what kind of spurred me into digging deeper and checking these books. Now, in this other Carroll Quigley book, The Anglo-American Establishment, on page 170, he explains the British decision behind backing Israel and going against the Arabs and basically giving Palestine to a pro-Zionist future state. And he says the general attitude of the Milner Group, which was one of the outcomes of Cecil Rhodes' will, was neither pro-Arab nor pro-Zionist, right? And then he goes in to say, look, the British had been among these people with T.E. Lawrence and whatnot, and they were very affable and they enjoyed the presence of the Arabs. Basically, Quigley lays out that the reason the British Empire went with British Israelism was twofold. The British royalty claimed to be descendants of, a great biblical king. So it's convenient for them to take on this illusion, if you will. And the other thing was that the pro-Zionists controlled their banks. And they said the Arabs don't control any commerce. We can't make any money with them. We can make money by making war with them. And at the end of the day, that's what the internationals do. They create wars so they can gain money and power, because they're afraid of you understanding what they know, and they want to control you. So it's that simple.
So now we've mentioned the I word, Israel, and when we start to talk about Israel or Zionism,